The war between two galactic empires had been raging for years. The battles were endless, the bloodshed unimaginable. Ships of all shapes and sizes clashed in the cold darkness of space. Stars burned bright as warships launched missiles and fired energy beams. The enemy fleets, led by their strongest generals, seemed unstoppable. They controlled nearly every sector of the galaxy, and no one had been able to stand up to their might. For countless years, the galaxies trembled beneath their rule. No one could challenge their power, until that fateful day when everything changed. It started like any other battle. The enemy fleet, massive and overwhelming, advanced into a sector known for its importance. It was a strategic location, and losing it would mean devastating consequences. The enemy knew this, and, like always, they intended to crush everything in their path. But then, something unexpected happened. The sensors on their ships went crazy. Something was coming. At first, they thought it was a glitch, a false alarm. But the readings were clear. Something was entering the battlefield. A new ship. The commanders on the enemy ships were puzzled. They'd seen many things in their time, many ships, many strategies, many weapons. But this was different. One ship? Just one? They laughed. The idea of one lone vessel trying to stand up against a fleet was almost absurd. The commanders exchanged jokes and orders. The enemy fleet was ready. There was nothing to fear. They would crush this new arrival just like every other challenge they had faced before. However, the laughing stopped when the ship appeared on their radar. It was nothing like they had ever seen before. Its shape was sleek, sharp, and unnerving. Unlike anything the enemy had ever encountered, it seemed to move differently. It wasn't just a ship, it felt like a predator, as if the ship itself was alive. The energy signature was off the charts, and the readings didn't make sense. It was like something was wrong in the very laws of physics. But before they could make sense of it, the ship advanced, closing in faster than expected. The enemy fleet moved into position, readying their weapons. They would crush this ship, no problem. They fired a few warning shots, testing the new arrival. The ship didn't flinch. Instead, it swerved, avoiding the shots with ease, as though it was part of its natural movement. Then, the impossible happened. The new ship fired back at first. It didn't seem like much, just a quick, simple shot aimed at one of the enemy battleships. The blast hit its target directly, and the ship seemed to shudder. Then, a massive explosion rocked space, sending debris flying in every direction. The other ships watched in complete shock. The destruction was instantaneous. The ship had no time to react. One shot. That was all it took. Panic began to spread through the enemy ranks. The commanders had never experienced anything like this. They scrambled to figure out what was happening. How had one ship destroyed a battleship so effortlessly? What kind of weapon was that? And who was behind this? The battle turned into chaos. The enemy fleet, once so confident in their numbers, began to hesitate. They fired everything they had: missiles, lasers, energy beams, anything to stop this new threat. But every single attack seemed to bounce off the ship. The energy blasts that should have torn apart the new vessel merely slid off its surface like raindrops on a window. The ship didn't even slow down. It was as if the laws of battle had been rewritten. The humans in this ship weren't just skilled, they were unstoppable. The enemy's confidence began to falter. One by one, they watched as their most powerful ships were destroyed. The human warship was no longer just a ship. It had become a force. The enemy commanders barked orders at each other, trying desperately to find a way to deal with this. Nothing was working. No one could touch the ship. In the midst of this chaos, the enemy's greatest fear began to creep in. What if this was just the beginning? They had been facing a new kind of warship, one that didn't follow the rules of battle, one that seemed impossible to defeat. Their once unshakable confidence began to crumble as they realized this was no ordinary ship. The ship continued to move with terrifying precision. It was like watching a predator stalk its prey, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The enemy fleet was losing more and more ships, and the commanders were no longer laughing. They were scrambling. They were afraid. This wasn't just a fight, it was a survival game. And then it happened. The new ship made a direct move toward the command ship, the heart of the enemy fleet. It was the final blow. The enemy commanders were powerless to stop it. The ship fired again, and in a flash, their largest vessel was gone. Another explosion. Another catastrophic loss. The battlefield was silent. All that remained were the wrecks of the once great enemy fleet. No one dared to speak. The human warship had done the impossible. The galaxy would never be the same. This was the moment the galaxy realized humans were no longer just a species to be ignored. The war had changed. Forever, the battle raged on, the vastness of space filled with flashing lights, explosions, and the echoes of endless war. Two powerful empires had been fighting for years, each determined to control the galaxy. Their ships were massive, their weapons deadly. They had fought battles on dozens of worlds, and no one had ever managed to stand up to them. But then, everything changed in an instant. One ship, a single vessel that seemed so small against the enormous enemy fleet, appeared without warning. It wasn't just any ship, it was humanity's warship, and it was about to rewrite the rules of war. As the human warship entered the battlefield, the enemy commanders couldn't believe their sensors. They laughed. One ship against their entire fleet? It seemed laughable. They had seen hundreds of ships come and go, but never had they faced something so audacious. Their fleet was armed to the teeth with weapons designed to wipe out entire planets. No single ship, no matter how advanced, could stand up to them. They were too powerful. Too vast. The humans, they thought, were simply too small to matter. But then, the impossible happened. With lightning speed, the human warship darted across the battlefield, dodging enemy fire with ease. It wasn't just avoiding the blasts, it was hunting, moving like a predator stalking its prey. The enemy ships were too slow to react, their weapons missing their target every time. How? How was it moving like this? The human warship wasn't just avoiding danger, it was outmaneuvering them at every turn. The enemy commanders ordered their ships to fire everything they had at the human warship. Missiles flew, energy beams blazed across the dark sky, and entire fleets of warships focused their fire on this one small ship. But nothing happened. The human warship didn't even slow down. It was like it didn't even feel the blasts. The attacks bounced off its hull, as if the ship was made of something far stronger than anything the enemy had ever encountered. The commanders watched in disbelief. This ship was different. They had no idea how, but they could feel it in the air. Something was wrong. And then, without warning, the human warship fired. It wasn't like any shot the enemy had ever seen. It was fast, precise, and terrifyingly powerful. One shot. That's all it took. It hit its target with such force that the enemy battleship disintegrated before anyone could react. The explosion was so massive it shook the very fabric of space. Pieces of the ship scattered in all directions, leaving behind nothing but a cold void where a mighty warship had once stood. The enemy fleet froze. Silence took over the battlefield for a brief moment. The human warship had fired one shot, and one shot had obliterated an entire enemy ship. It wasn't just the power of the blast that stunned them, it was the efficiency. One shot. That was all it took to bring down a ship that was supposed to be indestructible. How could it be possible? The enemy commanders were in shock. They had never seen anything like it. Their fleets had taken direct hits from entire armies and still stood, but this one ship, this one human vessel, had brought them to their knees with a single attack. The enemy fleet began to panic. They quickly ordered their remaining ships to move into defensive positions. It was clear now that they were not dealing with an ordinary enemy. The human warship was no longer just a ship. It was a force, a weapon that could not be ignored. The enemy commanders tried to regain control, barking orders at their fleets, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. They had underestimated humanity, and now the consequences were unfolding before their eyes. As the human warship continued its path through the battlefield, it didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It wasn't just taking down enemy ships, it was sending a message. Every shot, every strike was a declaration of power. The enemy didn't know how to fight back. Their weapons didn't work. Their tactics were useless. The human warship was too fast, too deadly, too unpredictable. Another shot rang out, and another enemy ship was destroyed. The enemy commanders watched in horror as their once mighty fleet began to break apart. Their pride, their arrogance, all of it shattered in an instant. What had once seemed like an unbeatable force was now crumbling. The human warship was showing them that size didn't matter. Strength didn't matter. In the blink of an eye, everything they had built was being torn apart by a single ship. And then, as the human warship moved towards the heart of the enemy fleet, something changed. The enemy commanders, once so confident, now realized something far more terrifying. They were losing. They had always believed that they were invincible, that no one, no ship, could challenge their power. But now they saw it. The humans had come, and they had come for one reason only: to win. There was no fear in the human warship, no hesitation, just the cold, unyielding march of a predator. They were outmatched. A final shot echoed across the battlefield. The command ship, the largest and most powerful ship in the enemy fleet, was destroyed in an instant. A massive explosion tore through the heart of the fleet, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. The human warship had delivered the final blow. As the smoke cleared and the stars shone brightly once again, the battlefield was quiet. The enemy fleet, once unstoppable, had been defeated. And it wasn't just a victory for humanity. It was a warning to the galaxy. The human warship had done the impossible, and now the galaxy would never be the same again. This was no longer just a battle. This was the beginning of a new era. One shot had shaken the galaxy to its core, and no one would forget it. The battle had begun like any other. The enemy fleet, vast and imposing, filled the stars with their numbers. They had dominated the galaxy for centuries, defeating any force that dared to challenge them. Every ship in their fleet was a weapon of mass destruction, and their commanders had never known defeat. To them, victory was as certain as the stars themselves. They were invincible. No one, no ship, no force could stand against them. That was the belief that had guided their conquests, a belief that had never been shaken. But now, everything had changed. It had started with one ship, humanity's warship, entering the battlefield. At first, the enemy commanders had laughed. One ship against their entire fleet? It seemed like a joke. But the joke quickly turned to horror. One shot from the human warship had destroyed an entire enemy battleship. In the blink of an eye, their pride and confidence were shattered. How could one small ship, seemingly so insignificant, do so much damage? But that was just the beginning. The warship's deadly accuracy, its terrifying speed, and its ability to survive everything the enemy threw at it were too much for the fleet to handle. The enemy fleet tried to regroup, firing everything they had. They unleashed missile after missile, energy beam after energy beam, hoping to overwhelm the human warship. But it was like hitting a shadow. The ship danced around their attacks, moving with unnatural precision. Nothing could touch it. Nothing could slow it down. Each enemy shot was met with an impossible dodge, and each counterstrike from the human warship shattered another enemy ship. It wasn't just the power of the human warship that shook the enemy. It was its relentlessness. The warship didn't retreat. It didn't hesitate. It moved forward with a single purpose: to destroy. And it was doing exactly that. The enemy ships began to feel the weight of their mistake. They had underestimated the humans. They had thought their size and strength would be enough to crush any opponent. But now, they realized that they were facing something entirely different, something they could not comprehend. Panic started to spread through the enemy ranks. The commanders barked orders, trying to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. The enemy fleet, which had once struck fear into every corner of the galaxy, was now on the defensive. They began to lose ships at a terrifying rate. One by one, their most powerful warships fell, torn apart by the human warship's relentless strikes. The enemy's once mighty weapons were useless against the human ship's advanced technology. The commanders, who had once stood tall in the face of every battle, now cowered in fear. They had never known what it was like to lose. They had never been in a fight where they weren't the strongest. And now, they were realizing that they were facing something that could not be defeated by sheer force alone. The human warship was not afraid. It did not care how many ships the enemy had or how many weapons they fired. It just kept coming, unstoppable, deadly. The enemy fleet began to scatter. Ships turned and fled, abandoning their positions. They had never run before. They had never been forced to retreat. But now, they had no choice. The human warship was too much. It was too powerful. They could not face it. They could not win. And so, they ran. The commanders ordered their fleet to retreat, their voices full of panic. The once proud fleet of the enemy, which had swept through countless galaxies, now turned tail and fled from a single ship. The sight of it was almost impossible to believe. The very idea that the mighty fleet of the enemy, which had never known defeat, was now running for its life seemed like a dream. But it was no dream. It was reality. As the human warship pursued, it seemed to move like a predator closing in on its prey. Every enemy ship that tried to escape was picked off one by one. The human warship didn't chase them with reckless abandon, it hunted them. It was methodical. It was relentless. It moved with purpose, picking off the weak, tearing through the defenses of those who dared to flee. The enemy commanders, once so sure of themselves, could only watch as their fleet was torn apart. They tried to send out distress signals, to call for reinforcements, but it was too late. The human warship had already proved its power. The once unbreakable enemy fleet was now shattered, reduced to nothing but wreckage floating in the cold void of space. The human warship didn't stop. It didn't rest. It kept going, hunting down every last enemy ship. The fleet that had once feared no one was now running from a single warship, their greatest defeat hanging over them like a shadow. The fear they had instilled in countless species across the galaxy was now their own. They had underestimated humanity. And now, they would pay the price. In the end, the human warship had done the impossible. It had shattered the enemy fleet, left it in ruins, and sent the surviving commanders running for their lives. The enemy, who had once been the rulers of the galaxy, were now reduced to nothing more than a memory. They had learned the hard way that arrogance had no place in war. The galaxy would never be the same. The message was clear: humanity had arrived. And it wasn't going anywhere. The time had come. After months of terror, retreat, and defeat, the enemy fleet had been cornered. The humans' warship had torn through their forces, leaving nothing but devastation in its wake. Every fleet they sent was shattered, every counterattack was rendered useless. But now, the enemy had gathered its remaining strength. This was the last fleet, the final force standing between humanity and total victory. It was their last chance to reclaim their dominance, to restore their power before it was completely erased. The humans had taken everything from them, and they would not be allowed to take the galaxy without a fight. This time, the enemy was not going to run. The commanders, desperate to end the human warship's reign of destruction, had called for reinforcements from every corner of the galaxy. A massive fleet was assembled, dozens of ships, armed to the teeth, with the finest weapons and technology available. This time, they would overwhelm the human warship. They would trap it, break it, and prove once and for all that the galaxy still belonged to them. The warship may have been unstoppable before, but they had learned. They had adapted. Now, they were ready. The final battle began with a deadly silence. The human warship appeared on the edge of the battlefield, its sleek, menacing shape cutting through the stars like a knife. The enemy ships immediately took their positions, surrounding the warship in a perfect circle. The human warship was outnumbered, significantly outnumbered, but the enemy commanders had learned from their previous mistakes. They knew the warship could not be faced alone, and they had prepared. This time, it would be different. This time, the human warship would fall. As the enemy ships moved in, their weapons charged, their sensors locked onto their target, the human warship did not retreat. It didn't hesitate. It moved forward with a calm, almost terrifying certainty, like a predator walking into the jaws of its prey. The enemy opened fire, a flood of energy blasts and missiles, hoping to overwhelm the warship before it could even react. But just like before, the warship danced through their attacks, swerving and weaving with unnatural precision. The shots missed. None of them even came close. The enemy commanders were left stunned. How could this be? How was the warship moving like that? How was it dodging every attack, every weapon they fired? The human warship didn't stop. It didn't pause. It retaliated with a terrifying force, launching a volley of energy blasts that tore through the enemy lines. The enemy ships, despite their numbers, had no defense against the warship's precision. Every blast hit its target, and each enemy ship was destroyed in a burst of fire and light. One after another, their most powerful ships were reduced to nothing. The commanders, who had once been so confident, began to feel the first pangs of fear. They had never experienced this before. They had never faced a battle where every attack seemed to fail. And then, something changed. The human warship, relentless and merciless, suddenly moved toward the center of the enemy fleet. It wasn't just fighting. It was hunting, picking off the weakest ships and making its way to the heart of the enemy command. The enemy commanders tried to regroup, shouting orders, telling their ships to fire with everything they had. But their desperation was clear. They were losing. They could feel it. The human warship was too fast, too deadly, and they could do nothing to stop it. The enemy fleet tried to form a defensive perimeter around their command ship. It was their last hope, their final stand. The largest battleship in their fleet, bristling with weapons, was positioned at the center, surrounded by smaller ships that would shield it from attack. But even as they attempted to form this final defense, the human warship was already closing in. The commanders gave the order for a full, all-out assault. It was a last-ditch effort to stop the warship. But then, the final mistake was made. In their desperation, the enemy fleet broke their formation. They scattered in an attempt to escape the warship's devastating fire, trying to overwhelm it with sheer numbers. It was a fatal mistake. The human warship, which had been moving with deadly precision, now acted like a force of nature. It wasn't just attacking, it was calculating. It read the movements of the enemy ships and exploited their every weakness. With each mistake the enemy made, it struck harder. With every move they made to escape, it was already there, waiting, poised to strike. The warship's next shot, aimed directly at the command ship, was like a bolt of lightning. It hit the battleship with terrifying accuracy, tearing through its shields and cutting deep into its core. The explosion that followed was like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. It was so massive that the shockwave tore through space itself, sending debris scattering in every direction. For a moment, the battlefield was filled with nothing but silence, the wreckage of the enemy command ship floating in the void. The enemy fleet was no more. Their greatest asset, their final hope, had been destroyed in a single, devastating strike. The commanders could only watch in horror as the remaining ships were picked off one by one. The human warship didn't stop. It didn't show mercy. It hunted down the last remnants of the enemy fleet, tearing through them with terrifying speed. In the end, the final stand was nothing more than a death sentence. The fleet that had feared no one, the fleet that had ruled the galaxy for so long, was now nothing but dust. And the mistake that had sealed their fate was their own arrogance. They had thought that sheer force could defeat the human warship. They had thought that one last push would be enough to break its resolve. But it was their last mistake. They had underestimated humanity. They had learned nothing from their previous defeats. And now they were gone. The galaxy was changed forever. The human warship had not only defeated the greatest fleet the galaxy had ever known, it had broken the will of an entire empire. And in doing so, it had sent a message to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity was a force to be reckoned with, and they would never again be ignored. The galaxy was still reeling from the shock. It had been months since the first shots had been fired, and now the once mighty enemy fleet was nothing but a distant memory, reduced to ruins. The human warship, a lone vessel, had done what no one thought possible. It had torn through the enemy's ranks, shattered their pride, and sent their greatest commanders fleeing into the far reaches of space. In its wake, a silence hung over the battlefield, an eerie silence that felt like the calm before the storm. But the storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived. The human warship, now the stuff of legend, was the symbol of humanity's rise. It was the weapon that had ended the reign of a galactic empire, and with each passing day, its story spread like wildfire through every corner of the galaxy. News traveled faster than ever before, and whispers turned to shouts as everyone from the smallest colony to the most powerful alliances heard the tale of the warship that had changed everything. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. There had been other forces, other wars, but nothing had ever been so quick, so decisive, and so final. The enemy's forces, who once believed they were invincible, now cowered in fear. Their leaders, who had once reveled in their cruelty and conquest, now shuddered at the thought of facing humanity again. They had made the mistake of underestimating the humans, thinking they were nothing more than an insignificant species, lost among the stars. But they had learned a harsh lesson. Humanity was not a race to be ignored. The galaxy would never forget the day when one ship took on an entire fleet, and 1.it was in the quiet moments, after the battles had ended and the debris had settled, that the true weight of the warship's impact began to sink in. The warship itself was still out there, somewhere in the vastness of space, waiting for the next challenge. It wasn't just a symbol of military power, it had become a symbol of something far greater. It was a reminder of humanity's strength, resilience, and determination. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times, a spark of hope could ignite a fire that would change the course of history. And that fire was still burning bright. As the years passed, the stories of the warship's victories continued to spread. But even as the warship faded into myth, its impact remained. The galaxy had seen what humanity was capable of, and nothing would ever be the same again. No longer would the galaxy look at humanity as weak or insignificant. No longer would they think of them as a species to be pushed around or defeated. The warship had proven that humans could stand tall, face impossible odds, and come out victorious. And now, every species in the galaxy knew that they would never forget. In every corner of the galaxy, humanity's name was spoken with respect, even fear. Alliances were formed, but the shadow of the warship loomed over all of them. Every fleet that prepared for battle, every general that strategized for war, had one thought in the back of their mind: what if the human warship returned? What if it came for them, like it had come for the others? The warship was not just a ship. It was an idea, a force that could not be ignored. It was a reminder that the galaxy was not just a place for the strong to dominate, but a place where the unexpected could happen, where even the most unlikely forces could rise up and change the course of history. The human warship, now legendary, had made sure that the galaxy would never forget. The enemy had been obliterated, their empire broken, their fleets scattered across the stars. No more would they think themselves invincible. No more would they oppress those weaker than themselves. Humanity had shown them that the will to fight, the desire to protect what mattered, could overcome any obstacle. In the end, it was the human spirit, embodied in that one warship, that had changed everything. It was the determination to fight for freedom, for survival, that had crushed the enemy's might. And as the story of the warship spread, as the galaxy told and retold the tale of how one ship had brought down an empire, it became clear humanity was not a force to be trifled with. And the galaxy would never forget the day it learned that lesson.